Hello and welcome to episode 30 of the Ikario podcast. Today's episode is about one of our favorite topics, which is empowering people or gaining personal power. And we will get right into it. For the show notes and anything else related to this episode, go to ikario.com/030 for episode 30. That is ikario.com/030. There you can find the show notes for this episode. You can also find show notes for all previous episodes. And while you're on our website, you can do things like leave comments and sign up to our newsletter. And with that said, let's get into today's topic.
Welcome once again to the Ikario podcast, where we help you break free from the human zoo, optimize your life, and become a force to be reckoned with. Once again with your hosts, Ollie, and here he is.
And I'm Shane. And today we're going to be talking about knives, guns, and personal power.
Cool.
And we'll get into that in a moment. It'll all make sense once we get to it, especially the personal power bit. But first, there's a comment on a recent YouTube video we published that I want to address, which was, can you talk about your experience with hair loss? This is from Tony. And he says, you're lucky enough to rock the bald look, but how do you mentally overcome the idea of losing hair?
That's a damn good question.
Yeah. To which, don't you ever call me bald.
Yeah, that's how we address the comment. It's like, we've had a comment about
we
balding.
bully people who mention it.
We're going to address that comment in this episode. Don't you dare mention that again. Anyway, on with the episode. No.
Anyway, so because it's a good question, because obviously for any guy, right, if you start balding, it's never a good day where you discover that your hairline is retreating up your forehead.
It's making an escape to the back.
So yeah, actually, let me ask you: Have you had a hair loss shock moment yet, or no?
The closest thing I came to a hair loss shock moment was, I think I caught a look of the back of my head in a video once, and it seemed like there was a bald spot, but it was just the way my hair was that day. And as soon as I saw it, I had this just creeping chill run down my spine, like, oh my God, like it was the fear of God, you know?
Yeah.
And I just, but it wasn't balding. So that was kind of lucky. But I have, I spoke to my dad about this once. I remember a conversation I had with him, and he's usually a guy who just doesn't really give a shit what anyone thinks about him. So this kind of surprised me. Now, when I just asked him outright, I was like, when did you start going bald? And he was like, late 30s. And I was like, okay, how was it? He was like, it's not good, mate. It's not a good day. And I was like, even for him, it was like, yeah, it took some adjusting to.
It is definitely like a mark. It seems like pretty much universal mark of, beauty and health is just like a thick head of hair, Now, my dad is bald and has been for most of his life. As far as I know, he kind of started balding in his teens practically.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
I think so.
That's rough.
But
at high school.
So I think for me, it was like, I definitely kind of saw it coming. And yeah, I've never seen my dad not bald. So it's just, I guess maybe also more normal for me or something. But anyway, my experience with this was that I'd had this haircut essentially. I've had this haircut since 16, I think, since I've been 16. And the thing is just that at one point I was like, you know what, I can just cut my own hair. I can just get one of these buzzers, and just cut my own hair. I don't have to go to a hairdresser, which saves time and saves money. And just close shorn style is good for, at the time, training basically. I was, with martial arts training, I don't want to have hair flopping into my face. I don't want to have something that an opponent can grab a hold of. So I was just like close shorn anyway. And so, yeah, and just for pure convenience, it's such a convenient haircut. So I've been having this haircut most of my life. And I do remember at one point that I realized I was in a gym, there was mirrors everywhere. And I was like, my hairline is definitely, it's like creeping up here. And I was like briefly worried about it. And I still seem to be like slowly going more bald because I'm starting to develop a bald spot on the top here, I think, as well. So it seems to be like a very slow progression, but it's been going on for a long time for me. And I was briefly worried about it, you know, because, yeah, for me too, I was seeing this like, oh, do I want to go bald? I'd rather not, you know, I'd rather not go bald. And then I spent like one afternoon researching like hair loss prevention and just came to the conclusion is like, no, I don't care to try and retain my hair that much, because all of it is just like, most of it is like just snake oil, right? It's not going to work. But it's very expensive. Or you can do some surgery type stuff, right, where there's hair transplants and whatnot.
Yeah.
Which I think has come a long way. I think you can get decent hair transplants now. But at the time, it was still like, you know, 50-50 chance that you end up looking like Frankenstein's monster in some way.
Yeah, one of my old hairdressers had a hair transplant, and he had this fringe. And then we got onto the topic, and he just says, yeah, this is a transplant. And then he like pulled his fringe up, and it was this perfect, like this really odd line right there. And I don't know, I couldn't.
That's still the case though. That's kind of a telltale sign of a transplant, is that it's just like a strangely perfect hairline.
Yeah, it was quite bizarre. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. He goes, yeah, exactly. That's why I have a fringe.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So, and then there's one thing, there's like minoxidil or something, which is this thing that you would twice a day for 20 minutes, you have to soak your scalp in it, and it has a long list of like possible side effects and stuff, and it might slow your hair loss a bit. And I was like, dude, I'm not nearly that committed to my hair, you know?
Yeah, but thing is, you've got a decent shaped head for having a shaved head. You know, there's some guys just, if you shave their head, they well, they don't look like, they don't look like it. You know, they don't look good, basically.
I mean, what this all comes down to is like the fear you have is it's about attractiveness, right? It's like, I'm gonna look less pretty without a thick mane of hair. Okay. And for me, what it really comes down to is two things. One is to acknowledge that what makes you more unattractive than being bald is being worried about being bald, right? So if you're someone if you do all kinds of stuff with your, you know, with like comb overs and everything related to comb overs, where you try to do stuff with your hair to hide the fact that you're losing your hair, that's very unattractive. And it's unattractive not because of the way it looks, but because of the attitude that's behind it. That's what I believe, right? It's like, if you have someone who's just like, yeah, this is what I look like, it's fine, that's not a problem. But if you have someone who's clearly worried about it and who's clearly spends a lot of time and a lot of money on their thinning hair, and and you know that they're touchy about it, you know that probably if I mention, you know, you could basically never mention their hair, never mention that they might be balding, right? They'll just like shatter into 1,000 pieces. That's unattractive. That's way more unattractive than being bald. Even if you have a weird shaped head, even if you have a weird looking head. Because the second thing is, it's basically acknowledging that and basically being at peace. We're just saying, yes, this is happening and I'm not resisting it. That's it. Because I think that the important thing to understand is, as a man, your attractiveness is only loosely related to how pretty you are. And let's be clear about that, right? There's a difference between being attractive and being pretty. Like, being pretty is you look nice in a picture, basically. And being attractive is many more things than that. And for me, I was never very pretty. So it was like, it's not going to make that much of a difference, you know.
Yeah, it's not that you were riding on it. Oh my God, my precious hair that I owe all of my success to.
Exactly, my modeling career. No. So, and for me, it's just like, you know, long before I started losing hair, I was just like, my attractiveness as a person and as a human being is not going to come from how pretty my face is. And so I'm all in on other things, right? And I think that the more you can be at peace with that, like knowing where your attractiveness and knowing where your value comes from, the less attached you will be to something like your hairline.
Yeah, that's fair. I've also got a contingency plan for when hairline starts receding or thinning or whatever. It'll reach a certain point, and then I'm going full Kratos out of God of War. It's the plan. Shaved head, beard, and then just
tattoos
and rock. Yeah,
tattoos across your face.
Head tattoos.
Yeah,
that will kind of distract people.
That'll distract people. Yeah,
yeah. It's like his head's dark. He can't be bald. Yes, you're right. But no, that's my plan. But no, I totally agree. It's I mean, I guess I was initially a little concerned about it for like 5 minutes, but then I recognized that there are plenty of people that I know who are bald, or they intentionally shave their head or whatever, and they're just super confident, and women are throwing themselves at them. Like, and so it's clearly a misappropriation of what you think is attractive about a guy in the eyes of women, because
and it's like, I also don't want to be, I want to be clear about it. Like I said in the beginning, absolutely. Most like famous actors and models and people who basically get paid to be attractive have thick hair, have a thick head of hair. It is definitely a signal of beauty, and you could certainly argue that if you just took me and you just added like a better hairline or whatever, that maybe that would increase my visual attractiveness, right? I'm not arguing against that. I'm just saying that it's just like you're not going to be everything to everyone, and to people for whom your hairline is the most important thing. Okay, well, they're not going to like me, or they're not going to find me attractive, and that's perfectly fine. You're not going to be everything to everyone, right? And I'm also not, yeah. So I think it's, what it really comes down to, I think, is like what is your internal like map of what makes someone attractive, and where do you see yourself there? Because as long as you are trying to be perfect, it's going to be a problem, of course, right? Because if you're trying to be perfect, then everything has to be perfect, and that's going to be agony anyway. But then if you can accept, okay, I'm not going to be perfect and I can still be good, and then can I create a map of how I want to be good and how I want to be attractive and so on, that actually fits with my strengths and weaknesses. And the more solidly you can like sit in that, the more I think you'll be at peace.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I did have a shaved head at one point.
Also when you were fighting, right?
Yeah, I was like 18, 19, something like that. And it wasn't a good look, only because I also shaved my face and had these weird little like wireframe glasses. It was strange. The restaurant I was working at, yeah, it's not good. The restaurant I was working at the time likened me to a late 40s British TV cook called Heston Blumenthal.
Nice.
And when I saw one of the guys got a picture of him out on his phone, I was like, I can't even argue with that. There is a real likeness, and I dislike that heavily. So it was the end of me shaved head times for the time being.
All right, so I hope this is helpful for anyone who's balding and worried about it.
Basically, it's not as big of a deal as you think it is, is in a nutshell.
With that, let's get to the main topic for today, which I've titled Knives, Guns, or actually, is it Knives, Cars, and Personal Power? Oh, yeah. Knives, Cars, and Personal Power. This is a bit less aggressive sounding.
A bit less aggressive.
So let me start. This is about personal power, which obviously is an important topic for what we talk about on this podcast as well. We've talked about empowering people and the idea of increasing your personal power, increasing your power level in a way, right? That is a value that we convey, or that we try to convey. And I have a story to lead into this topic from my childhood. So as a child, from a pretty young age, I was fascinated with, weapons and fighting and just guns, and, I liked toys that were, action figure toys. And I liked toy guns, and I was the kind of kid where if I was playing outside, every stick I saw looked like a sword or a gun or something to me, And so, and my parents, being former hippies and very peace-loving and pacifist and so on, were not very thrilled with this. And I think especially my mother was worried about it, worried about how much I was just attracted to all things that were like warlike. And this, obviously this led to various conflicts. But one thing I very clearly remember is that at one point I managed to acquire a knife. So I don't know, I'd saved up some pocket money and I found someone who'd sell a knife to a 10-year-old or whatever I was at the time,
Some shady character.
Yeah. And then I had this knife for a while, and my mother at one point discovered it and took it away from me. And this is not to criticize the parenting I received. It's just, what's funny is from my perspective, like obviously I understand why she made this decision, but it's also so obvious how ineffective it was, because it did nothing to quell my interest in weapons and things like that. And just, whatever the next point in time was where I managed to get my hands on a knife, I have one again,
I imagine it made you more curious.
If anything, it makes it more attractive, right? It's now a scarce thing. But it didn't work in terms of like any efforts my parents made to try and quell this, whatever you want to call it, this aggression or whatever in me. It didn't work. And even like, basically, I still love all this stuff. I still love weapons, and I still love fighting and martial training and so on. I still love knives too, and swords. That's also one of the first big purchases I ever made. Actually, was I bought real swords to actually handsmith swords to train with. And so my enthusiasm for this stuff never went away. But at the same time, there was never anyone in my life who taught me how to use a knife. And I think there lies a problem. And it's a problem that I think we see a lot of in the world. And I think all of us experience this problem in many, many areas of life. And I think this is something that I'd like to try and fix, or at least on a personal level, people can do better here. Because the problem is in this attitude of, okay, a knife is dangerous, which is true. Yes, a knife's dangerous. You can hurt yourself. You can hurt other people. And therefore, you're not allowed to have it. And this doesn't work. Like, this is why I'm telling this story. Like, I had no less desire to own a knife after being told it's dangerous and I'm not allowed to have it than before. So that didn't work. The problem is, what no one did was say, here's how to use a knife. And if you can prove to me that you can be a responsible knife owner, then you're allowed to have a knife. And I think that's what should have happened. I think that would have worked, right? If someone would have taken me aside and said, listen, I'm going to teach you how to use a knife responsibly. I'm going to teach you how to, whittle a stick, and I'm going to teach you how to hold it, how to clean it, how to kind of knife awareness as well is something that basically at any point you have to know what direction is the thing pointing. And, don't turn around with it like pointing in a way where you could stab someone. Don't run with it and then fall onto it and stuff like that, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into like, how do you become a responsible knife owner and a capable knife user? And at some point, you can say, okay, look, a knife is still dangerous, right? There's still a non-zero chance of something bad happening. But at some point, you have proven that you have the discipline, and you've shown to me that you've developed the skills, and you haven't lost interest, right? That's another thing. Like if I were to do this with a kid, it would also be like, this is a fairly long process. And one of the things that might happen is you just lose interest, right? It's like day one, you're like, oh yes, I want a knife and so on. But it's like, are you still here on day 10? Are you still here several months in to come to your, to your next how to use a knife responsibly lesson? And if not, that's fine.
Yeah.
Your interest has gone somewhere else. That's fine, right? But if you're still here and you've proven to me that you can do this with discipline and responsibility and so on, then at some point it's like, yes, now you're allowed to have a knife.
Mm-hmm.
And this also, so basically I think this is the safer outcome. Because saying you're not allowed to have a knife and also I'm not going to tell you anything about knives means that I'm going to find a way to have a knife anyway, but I'm not a responsible trained knife user and I might do something stupid. Right? That's the less safe outcome than if you say, okay, there's a path for you to be allowed to have a knife, and at that point you're so much better, you know so much more about it, and you've practiced this under supervision so much that now it's actually less dangerous, right? So I think that would be the better outcome, and it would also be like a small rite of passage. it would be one of those things where someone, you know, an older role model, kind of father figure type person in your life, like puts you through a series of tests in a way, and then tells you, yes, you've passed the test. You've now leveled up to the point where you're allowed to have a knife. And I think that this is the right approach. And I think this kind of thing should continue. I think that trying to bar people from doing things that are dangerous and doing things that increase their power is basically not going to work. People are always, especially when because look, ultimately that's one of the reasons why is a knife dangerous? Well, it's a weapon. It's something that increases your power. And obviously that's one of the things we hope that people don't go around using a knife in order to use that extra power they gain, you know, to mug people or whatever. But that's one of the things you can do with it. And so that's why it's so important to have people's responsibility level up along with their power. But if there's an option for someone to acquire more power, people will always find a way to do that. And so if you simply try to bar people from doing things that increase their power, that's not a good solution. They'll find a way to do it anyway, but they'll then be irresponsible users of that thing. And I think in some ways, in some aspects of what is normal life for us, we get that right. So, for example, when it comes to driving a car, you know, yes, cars are very dangerous, but nobody just tells you, no, you're not allowed to drive a car. What we do instead is we say, listen, there's a bunch of stuff you need to learn, and you need to prove yourself. You need to prove that you understand how to use this machine, that you know the rules, that you follow the rules, etc., etc. When you've proven all that, then you're allowed to drive a car. And depending on where you live, the same would be true with guns, right? If we go from knives to guns, it's basically the same thing. I'm, you know, and I say this as someone I'm not massively, I'm not a huge fan of guns. I know that, you know, in the States it's a huge political thing, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's like I'm pretty meh about guns, so I don't care either way. But I think in principle, what you should do is you should raise the bar of responsibility. Instead of telling people, no, you're not allowed to have guns, it's just like, okay, the bar of responsibility for owning a knife is here. Well, the bar of responsibility for owning a gun is way higher. You have to do way more work to prove that you can be a responsible and safe gun owner before you're allowed to do this. And I think that, again, the same thing is, this to me is like the ideal model, right? Ideally, there would be a path for us by which we can improve and increase our personal power, but it always comes with a requirement of increased responsibility. And I think all of the areas in which the world that we live in, the culture that we live in, doesn't do that and just says, no, this is bad, you're not allowed to do this, is just dropping the ball. And it's also opening up the door for abuse.
Yeah, it's you say increased responsibility, but it's also increased competence.
Yes.
So it's the same reason why if kids are skateboarding and you just stop them and then just do something that's safe, then it's like you're inhibiting something in the kid that it's like they want to confront danger and they're trying to get better to the point where they can sort of master this dangerous activity and increase their own competence. So it's the same thing with the knife thing. It's like competence and responsibility. And it seems like to me, you're saying that if you remove the danger altogether, then you also remove the capacity or the chance for them to become more competent and capable.
Yeah.
The thing I wanted to say about the knife and the car sort of, you know, you brought up the knives and you brought up the car thing. I think with the car though, it's like the modern necessity of it means that we're like, well, okay, we can't get rid of cars because we need to drive.
Yeah.
But I think the argument would be made by the people who say, no, well, you're not having a knife because why would you need a knife today?
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's fair. And we might see that with cars, right? It's like we might see that in our lifetime that, you know, self-driving cars become normal. And then at some point people will be like, no, you're not allowed to drive a car.
Yeah, yeah.
And there, I see this as the same thing. It's like you should be still allowed to drive a car if you can prove that you have the competence and discipline, etc., required. You know, it should absolutely be still allowed. And I think it's, especially with something like that, you know, it also makes perfect sense to say, look, it's confined. You know, maybe you're not allowed to self-drive a car in a city. Well, who wants to drive in a city anyway, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's like instead of just saying, no, this is not allowed at all anymore, I think it's much better to try and create a system that has this in which like the power increases along with responsibility and capability. But also, with the car example, it's also like, if you're not allowed to drive the car yourself, but you're still allowed to own the car and you choose where the car drives you and stuff, it's not less power than before, right? It's not less power than before. And I think it becomes a problem when you get into areas that are tied to personal power. So one example of this is if you think about communication, and basically if you think about like manipulation skills, so persuasion, manipulation, this kind of thing. This is something that's very taboo. And in most cases, it's not like forbidden, right? It's not like it's forbidden to learn about manipulation techniques, for example. But it's just like, it's kind of frowned upon, right? And it's also, generally people wouldn't encourage you to do this. And the problem is that this opens up the door to abuse. So because if you learn how to persuade and manipulate people, you can gain a lot of personal advantage.
Yeah.
And if it's a general taboo, so it's not something that is taught in school, it's generally like, you have to go to the weird bookshop to find a book about it and stuff like that. That just means that there's more potential victims around. If everybody knew about this, right? If everybody knew about even just the basics of manipulation, then it would be much harder for a manipulator to find a target. And actually, I think that it's almost like, in a way, this is happening a bit. We've mentioned this before, right? On YouTube, there seems to be like a real trend for like dunking on fake gurus. And this is great to see, because it does some of that. I mean, to me, a creator like CoffeeZilla who spends almost all his time just like explaining how different like scams and things work. He's doing a really important like role of educating people about, look, here's how they get you, right? Here's how a con man, a confidence man, right? Who's like, they gain your confidence, right? You feel like, yes, this is a good choice confidently. That's their job, right? Here's how they get you. And the more people know about these tricks, the more people know about how they are persuasive and how they suck you in and stuff, the better, because the harder it is for them to find a target.
Mm. And this is that mental self-defense you often talk about. Yeah, there was I need to tell a quick story, actually. I think I might have told you this one before, but I haven't mentioned it on the podcast before. There was a time that springs to mind when we talk about mental self-defense and manipulation and stuff. There was one instance where I was totally manipulated, and under like some sort of like spell, or it was very, very, very weird. So this was when I lived in London, and I was a bit of a hippie, and I'd walk around with a big smile on my face, and I'd just be like, if someone wanted to manipulate me in some way, I looked like just the prime target. Like, this guy's completely harmless. So I was walking around, walking around the city near a train station, and there's a guy outside, and this fella and he initially came over and he asked for money for like, for like an orphanage or something. I was like, sorry mate, I ain't got any money. And then he just says, because I like to believe myself as a guru at the time, and he was like, oh my God, wow, there's something about you. You're different, aren't you? You know. And I'm like, what do you mean? I was already just involved. Yeah. You played to my ego, Yeah. And then he was just like, oh, there's something about you. You're not like most people. And I was like, can I do some numerology stuff with you? And I was like, what's that? He's like, I'll show you. So basically did this bunch of things, asked me to pick different numbers and yada, yada, yada. And then he did this thing and then said, is this the number you picked? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, I told you, there's something different about you. For some reason, I was totally sucked in. This guy was extremely charismatic. Like, he had just a vibe of complete, like, wow. Like, you instantly trusted him for some reason. Yeah. Really bizarre. And then it came to the point, the awkward bit, where I was like, right, okay, you need to know the next number, but you need to, I need you to pay me first. Like, so you need to put like a 10 or 20 quid into my hand, and then we'll sort it out. And I was like, I told you I ain't got any money. And he was like, okay, well, we can go to the ATM. There's an ATM in the train station. So I was like, okay. So I ended up walking to the ATM and got like 20 quid out for him. And then he goes, okay, it's not just that though, but I need the beads. Like, I had prayer beads on. He was like, I need those beads as well. And then we can, And I gave him my fucking beads. And then he was like, and then he pushed it a bit too far. He goes, all right, okay, I need your headphones too. I was like, mate, you are not having my headphones. It was at that point that he noticed that he'd pushed me to that length. And then it was that thing that was like, boom. And he was like, okay, no problem. Have a good day. And walked off. And I was just stood dumbfounded in this train. I was like,
Wow.
what the fuck just happened over the past 15 minutes? What was that?
Yeah.
And it sticks in my mind as there are people out there, because in that moment, I was pretty damn naive, to be honest. And I recognized that in that moment, there are people out there who, they're not ethical.
Yeah.
They don't give a fuck about screwing you over. They don't actually care. It doesn't register in their conscience that this is probably a bad thing for me to do. They probably have a model of the world as like, it's dog eat dog. If I weren't going to do it, someone else will do it. Therefore, I'm justified in this. They've got their own justifications for it. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they just don't feel empathy. There are people out there like that. And I had to update my world model pretty quickly. I thought, wow, that's horrendous. I was kind of reaffirmed that, God, I would never do that. Therefore, I feel, I'm empathic. I'm a human being. I'm not a psychopath. Thank God for that. Because this is how I find that instance so crazy. But at the same time, I knew that I had to, like, something had to change. And I'm not saying it did, because years later, I got swindled by by a fake guru myself. So it's like, it's the mental self-defense thing and manipulation. If I'd have learned the dark arts from someone and say, listen, there are people in the world who'll do this. They'll use this tactic. They'll compliment you. They'll play to your ego. They'll do this, and then they'll need something from you. It'll, if I was taught that, if my competence was high, or even like in the case of the fake guru, if I'd have watched CoffeeZilla's videos for 6 months prior to that, I would have been like, this guy's ticking every single fucking fake guru box. Yeah. But because I wasn't trained in this way, my competence was low. And I don't know fully how this relates to like the knives thing, but it's just like competence.
No, it is. It's definitely that, because it's like there's an imbalance of power there, and nobody ever. Because look, I think the equivalent of this, and by the way, just for the record, right, I've also been swindled out of money a couple of times by some hucksters. When I was young, I also had to learn the hard way, basically, and I think that it's a similar thing, because the way I grew up, it's like, okay, there's a bunch of shady stuff. This is like the bad stuff. Don't do that, right? It's like gambling, casinos, strip clubs, this kind of stuff. It's bad. Don't do it. We don't talk about it. And I think exactly the same thing should happen. Instead of just being like, well, we're just going to hope that you like never stumble across a con man or something. No, it's actually like when you reach a certain age, someone should take you to one of these shady places and start pointing out to you what's going on, right? It's like, let's go to whatever the equivalent, whatever the equivalent of Vegas is, Let's go to where all this shit is happening. Let's go to where everyone goes to lose their money, and there's a huckster on every street corner, and so on, right? Let's go there, and I'm going to point out to you what is going on, right? Or even things like, that's another thing. Like, nobody ever taught me how to act in a marketplace. Like, nobody taught me how to haggle. Nobody taught me what goes on in a bazaar, And it's also one of those things where I didn't suffer any severe losses because of this, but it's just one of those things. The first time I was in that kind of environment, I was just like, I was the mark, right? I was the mark. I was the victim for everyone there, because I had no idea what was going on. And it's this kind of thing. It's like someone should take you under their wing, essentially, and show you this stuff and level up your level of competence, your level of capability, so that you're not just walking around as a sucker everywhere.
I think it's a good course or product idea. With the rise of all fake gurus and stuff, it's like a mental defense kind of course. Like show you from the inside all the manipulation tactics that people use. Yeah,
which is interesting to use. And it's so one of the things that kind of saved me there is I got interested in magic, basically. So in illusionism.
Yeah,
that's what it's called. So, whatever card tricks, mind reading tricks, this kind of stuff. And I never got like super into it, but I read a couple of books about it. And it's kind of mind blowing. It's mind blowing to see how simple it sometimes is to create an illusion. And just understanding some of the mechanisms by which this kind of thing works is, that really helps for mental self-defense, I think.
Yeah. So we've got the knives, we've got the cars.
Well, let's talk about this same principle at like a more systemic level, because that's also where I feel like our culture fails us, right? What we talked about so far, I think, can be solved with like basically good parenting, good mentorship, that kind of thing. And also we can do this for ourselves to a certain degree. So just like I said, with just read up about how do manipulators manipulate, get some very basic knowledge of how illusions work. This kind of thing can bolster your mental self-defense if no one else has done it for you.
There's just there's one way I wanted to kind of sum up, I guess, a principle that I think is just underlying all this, and is that, so if there's danger here, by removing the person completely from the danger, it's like yes, you remove them from the danger in the moment, but at a cost.
Yeah.
It's you could almost say that it just makes them essentially weaker.
Yeah.
And possibly more afraid, because now you've just, like, say you take if you raise a kid and you communicate to a kid, it's like you just take them away from anything that's dangerous, and you keep doing that, you are communicating to the child that the world is essentially just full of dangerous things, and therefore you basically should be afraid of most things.
And you're lowering their power level, and this happens in a very real degree, right? Like the more you do this, and it's a trap. It's a trap because all this safety becomes a prison essentially. And this happens in a very real way. Like a simple example of this is when kids grow up in an overly sanitized environment. So you keep them away from all the dangers of pathogens. Well, as a result, they basically have no immune system. And so then, as people, they're confined to living in highly sanitized environments. And there's also a possible correlation between this and allergies, right? So it's like, in a very literal sense, like trying to protect someone from all the possible bad things in a world makes them super, super fragile. It means they have to kind of sit inside a well air-conditioned, air-filtered apartment all day because everything in the world is a danger to them. And I think this is true in many other ways as well. It's also like, if you try to coddle children and give them as much safety as possible, so they're never allowed to do anything unsupervised, they're never allowed to do anything without asking permission first, helicopter parenting, all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, you're making them incapable of navigating the world themselves, and that becomes a much bigger problem later on, right? It's like it's a much bigger problem than the potential problem of whatever you're trying to protect them from out in the world. Yes, of course, if you let your kids play unsupervised, yes, there's someone's going to fall off a tree and break a leg and stuff like that, but it's like the consequences of not letting them do that later on are much worse than a broken leg.
Yeah, it also kind of just begets more of the same, because if you create, if you prevent a child from engaging with the world in that way that might hurt them, and they grow up to be an adult that's essentially just afraid or anxious or whatever, then that gets carried across generationally.
Oh yeah.
Because if you have anxious parents, there's a higher chance that the kids are going to be anxious too, because they're just reflecting the parents' behavior. So they say, like, if you develop a phobia of some kind in childhood, of spiders and stuff, and say it's possible that you were looking to your caregivers for a sign for, is this a danger or not? And if your mum just looks at spiders like, holy shit, come and kill this spider, freaking out, then as a kid you're like, whoa, okay, that's danger. Because it's extremely beneficial for a kid who has a really rudimentary, the brain is not developed yet, and they're very emotional. So they're just mirroring your emotions. So it's like, shit, okay, cool, I get message that the spider is dangerous.
Yeah.
But then if you just observing your parents' behavior, and your parent is just an anxious person, just nervous about everything, doesn't see the opportunity in things, basically scared of things, tries to be as safe as possible, you're just learning that behavior, and that just
that's a really powerful example, I think. And this is why I think empowering people is so important. It runs really deep. So this is something to be aware of. So for me, the goal has basically always been to increase my personal power level, so that I am essentially more resilient and more capable, and I can be an agent in the world, a capable agent in the world. And instead of trying to stay away from all kinds of parts of the world, for reasons of safety, right? I want to increase my power level and basically increase how far I can go and how much I can do, essentially. And I think that this is also something that happens like on a systemic level or on a cultural level. If you look at something like, if you look at legal and illegal drugs, then there's clearly a problem there where there's a very strong sense of like there's permission, right? There's permission to use certain drugs and not others. But the really crazy thing is that you're really skewed, like your options are really skewed to the downside. And what I mean by that is, okay, what are you allowed to do? You're allowed to smoke cigarettes. Now, smoking cigarettes can do basically nothing good for you. And it has all kinds of very well-known, very dangerous downsides. But because they're like mild long-term downsides, we're like, no, that's fine. You can slowly kill yourself with cigarettes. That's fine. Alcohol, same, right? Obviously, it does a lot of like social lubricant stuff for people, right? People are always going to find a way to consume alcohol, clearly. But also it has some serious negative repercussions, and basically a lot of people die because of alcohol consumption. And just to be clear, right, I am firmly of the belief that it is correct to allow people to consume alcohol, even though it's dangerous and even though it's bad for them. But then you get to things like, psychedelics, you get to things like LSD or mushrooms, and it's like, that's not allowed. Well, why is it not allowed? It's dangerous. Well, is it really dangerous compared to these other things? But the really screwed up thing about it is that if you take something like LSD, then, okay, maybe there's a danger. Is it equivalent to alcohol or cigarettes? Well, not according to any objective study that's ever been done on this. But there's a chance that it does something really good for you. And I'm so, basically shout out to Tim Ferriss, who's been, I think, doing a great job of bringing all the like psychedelic research, the psychedelic therapeutic research to the public light. And I'm a huge fan of this kind of thing. There are certain things like depression and PTSD where psychedelically assisted therapies are more effective than anything else that we know by orders of magnitude. And so if you disallow this stuff, it means that you have hundreds of thousands or even millions of people suffering from, let's say, depression, who could be cured, or whose situation at least could be significantly improved by doing something that is maybe mildly dangerous, but definitely less dangerous than a lot of things we allow people to do. And that's pretty fucked up. Yeah. It's pretty fucked up that you are being told this is allowed, this is not allowed. And all of the stuff that you're allowed to do is biasing you towards negative outcomes versus the stuff that you're not allowed to do. And this is a real problem. This is a real problem that, again, it disempowers people. Right? It says, oh, you take a psychedelic, you might have all kinds of, you might freak you out. Yeah, sure. It might freak you out. But what? And the solution is you're not allowed to have this experience? That's insane. Mm-hmm. And that's just one example, right? Where it's almost like, and the other thing I hate about this is that this kind of infantilizing of people. Because it's like you have the state as like the surrogate parent figure who tells you this is allowed, this is not allowed, and doles out punishment and reward accordingly, right? And when the state does this for something like crime, it's like, okay, if you kill another person, then we're going to get you. That makes perfect sense. But when it does it for, you're allowed to eat this mushroom, but not that mushroom, no.
Yeah, and it's not affecting anyone else,
Yeah.
It's like you could just sit in your basement and just, I don't know why basement, but like apparently a basement, and just eat loads of mushrooms or take a psychedelic or something, and you could be alone.
Yeah.
And you're committing a crime that you would be arrested for.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not affecting anyone else. I could have the worst trip in my life. You don't really care about that, to be honest.
Yeah, it's not about that, right?
It's not about that. So yeah. God only knows what it is about.
Yeah. So, and that's an example where I think, again, it's this wrong attitude of we're going to protect, in air quotes, protect people from this stuff, instead of saying, well, if you want to do psychedelics, and this would be in like pre-civilized cultures, what you'd usually have is you'd have some shaman or witch doctor or something like that, where someone has the role of understanding these things, and they can basically tell you, here's how you have to prepare for this, right? You want to have this experience, you've got to do a bunch of stuff, you've got to fast and meditate and do this and that. And then they tell you, okay, now you're ready, you can have this experience, right? And that's what we're totally missing. And as a result, okay, is the result that people don't use these drugs? Of course not. The result is just that we're lacking a framework that would actually provide safety, that would actually give people a sense of when am I ready for this? Where do I go to get guidance and so on? No, instead you just do it at a party somewhere, right? So that is, to me, an example of how we get this very wrong. And another example of that is with financial stuff, right? So our financial world is heavily permissioned, where you have to there's always a pile of paperwork before you're allowed to do anything significant with money. The options you have are really strongly skewed to your downside, which is that as an everyday person, you're allowed to take out a huge loan to buy shit you don't need. You're allowed to essentially drown yourself in debt and put yourself in a really, really bad financial situation. But if there's, an IPO of some promising startup, or even, some promising startup you want to invest, then see how bloody difficult that is. There suddenly it's no, we have to protect people from being irresponsible with their money. Therefore, you have to be an accredited investor, blah, 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 right? Before you're allowed to make an investment where you could gain a great upside. No, we can't let you do that. We can't let you do that. You can wait. You can wait till it's publicly listed in the stock market, which means that everyone else has already gotten their share, and now you can buy a share so they can dump on you, right? So it's just so heavily skewed to the downside. All of your options, if you basically look at, the Venn diagram of all the options that are allowed and all the options that are either disallowed or behind some obstacle, and you look at which of these lead to good and bad outcomes, it's a really shit situation that we're in.
Yeah. Sorry, it just reminded me. Bit of an unrelated topic, but the UFC has just become a public company.
Seriously?
Yeah, so it just came to mind and distracted me for a moment that I might invest in those guys.
You should invest in the UFC.
Invest in the UFC, yeah. But yeah, so it actually reminded me there's a book that's on my reading list. I don't know if I should quote books on my reading list, but it's The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been on my reading list for a little while, and I think he makes a similar point to this. I know in The Happiness Hypothesis, which I have read, by the same author, he has a chapter on this where he makes a really strong case that avoiding offense, avoiding any situation in the academic world where a student will be offended or have to sort of rebuild their belief system around a certain topic or whatever. Avoiding that altogether, it weakens the culture.
Yeah.
He makes a real strong case for that.
Yeah. And so I think that, to maybe bring this to a conclusion, I think that, well, hopefully this is an idea that resonates with people and maybe sparks some further ideas. But in terms of how do you actually put this into practice, the way I see it is that what you can do is you can seek out adversity, basically. Right, so this is the warrior solution to this problem, right? The warrior archetype solution is, I see this as two parts. It's one, you are always seeking to know and confront the brutal facts about reality. So you're not looking to, like you said, you're not looking to not be offended. You're not looking for people to beat around the bush in order to whatever make you feel slightly better. It's no, I want to know the brutal facts of what's going on. There's no truth so bad that I don't want to know it. And the second is you seek adversity. You seek adversity because adversity makes you strong. And basically, controlled adversity is what we're looking for, right? So it's how do you increase your power level? It's basically almost always through some form of adversity. And sometimes the adversity is very mild, right? Sometimes all you have to do is you have to learn some stuff, but even learning stuff, actually learning stuff, well, it takes time, it takes effort, right? But sometimes the way to level up your power is you have to go through an experience that is maybe difficult, and it's controlled adversity is ideal, but if someone else can tell you, listen, this is the dosage of a difficult experience right now, or this is the size of adventure that you can take, and that you can take relatively safely. You'll come out of it with some scratches and bruises, and having learned a valuable lesson. And that's what we're going to make available to you. That's ideal, right? Because what we want to avoid is too much adversity that turns into trauma. So you take on something that's too much, you go too deep into the jungle, and something really bad happens, right? But that's basically it, right? It's like, in terms of how do I do this? How do I not let this let's say this cultural theme of just keeping people small and weak and taking permissions away from them? How do I break free from that? It's like you deliberately seek out adversity that makes you stronger.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's just something else I wanted to bring up. I think it was, so we mentioned about knives. In London and other parts of the UK, like Manchester and stuff, there's a real problem with knife crime. Like, we don't have guns in the UK as much, but we've got a shitload of knives, and kids are using them. But one thing I really loved about how in London specifically, they're helping tackle this, is they encourage boxing instead. And I love that. I think that's fantastic, because you've got kids that they've one postcode versus another postcode. You've got the tribalism and stuff. What you're going to do is jump in and say, like, don't do that. Look, they're going to take the knives away. They'll be kicking the shit out of each other anyway. Like, there's something deep there going on. And what a number of boxing gyms have done instead is get these kids that would otherwise be stabbing each other. Like, if there's a boxing gym in one postcode and another postcode, say, right, okay, you got beef with these guys? All right, sweet. Well, they're training for 8 weeks to kick the shit out of you in the ring. You do the same thing. So then they'll train for 8 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever, and then have boxing matches.
That's awesome, yeah.
And I'm like, that's fantastic. Because there's some raw aggression going on there that if you just extinguish that completely or attempted to, one, it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And two, you'd be taking a lot of potentially good stuff with it. But I think that's such a great example, right? Because yeah, like you say, if you just try to take away the permission, that's not going to work. But if you can channel it into boxing, and then it's like, okay, now you're actually training, and you're literally going through a difficult experience in order to get stronger. I mean, that's all training is, right? And you're learning technique, and you're learning all kinds of stuff, and you're working with a team and so on. It's like, that's such a great way to channel that. Honestly.
Yeah.
So seek adversity, seek the things you're afraid of, and develop your competence in that way.
Yeah. All right. I think that concludes this episode. I would love to hear your thoughts on this same topic, maybe similar experiences that you've had, or other things you want to add. So go ahead and leave a comment. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave a comment there, or you can go to ikario.com, leave a comment on our blog, or any other way. Also, if you're listening to this on iTunes, then leave us a review. That would be cool. I think maybe it helps more people find the podcast. I don't know, but it would make us feel good if you left a review. So
caress our delicate egos.
Exactly. We need that.
All right, guys. Pleasure as always, and see you next week.